What is the craziest way you've seen someone cheat on a test? A while back in this business law class I took, we had a final that was online, multiple choice, had to be completed in 90 minutes, and there were 90 questions. We had a minute per question for a business law class and each of them were pretty detailed. A couple classmates asked if I wanted to take it with them and I declined. So anyways, I heard that half of the class ended up taking the final together. They started and ended at different times. They assigned groups of 3 to 10 questions each. For certain questions they decided to choose different answers so they didn't have the same answer as the rest of the group. One person had a running list of the answers that they found. A kid in my grade 11 social studies class made a huge poster-sized cheat sheet and hung it on the building across from our classroom so that he and several other students could see it when they looked out the window. The teacher never suspected anything until the principal happened to walk by outside and noticed it and gave the funniest look at our classroom through the window. Someone got in trouble, but secretly, I think the principal was actually kind of impressed. Dedication. My brother has diabetes and he didn't study for his math test. The class before, he gave himself too much insulin so that his blood sugar would drop in the middle of the test. He asked if he could go to the nurse's office to check his blood sugar. The teacher took his test and told him to finish it tomorrow. Before he left, he wrote down all the problems to the test and went home and solved them. He got an A+ on that test. When OP said crazy, I never thought risk your freaking health crazy. You are in Burko delivered. Had a friend try to learn Braille so he could cheat in Spanish. He soon realized it was just easier to study Spanish than learn Braille, plus he had no real way of actually generating Braille cheat sheets. The point of a pencil and some paper is all you need. As a teacher, I had a totally different person try to take an oral English test in place of one of my students. It was obvious because I knew all the students, despite having 200 students that semester and stereotype of white people thinking all Asians look similar, and I definitely knew the students who had enough English to argue politics. The exam was fun, we had a good conversation, and the student got the only F in the class. In a listening language test, the smart guy would cough if the correct answer was A, scratch his F or C, fiddle his pencil for D, and most brilliantly, do nothing if the answer was B. This is basically what happened on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire with Charles Ingram, who later got arrested and went to court because of it. Our high school had a uniform, which was pleated skirts for girls. I knew someone who would put strips of paper in the hidden part of the pleats. It wasn't too obvious to check and no one was going to ask her to unfold her skirt. I also knew someone who had their friend distract the teacher so that he could sneak into the classroom, put the CD for the test bank in the computer, and memorize the answers to the final. He got over a 90% on the 100 question test, which makes me believe he was smart enough to not have needed to cheat. A friend of mine had gotten a hold of the test sheet beforehand and had written the answers on toilet roll. Halfway through he asked to go and an invigilator accompanied him, except he went into the wrong stall. Invigilator. That sounds like something straight out of Harry Potter. An interesting title compared to Proctor. Saw a stack of Accorfina labels lying around in my friend's dorm room and noticed that the nutrition facts and ingredients space was blank. When I asked about it, he proceeds to show me a template on his computer to type out answers onto the label's blank spaces. He just prints out his cheat sheet, wraps it around a spare water bottle, and keeps it on his desk while taking the test. So he's the reason some C made me toss my iced cappuccino out in high school during a final. Once I made the effort to scan in the label of a water bottle, Photoshop a bunch of info onto it in the form of nutrition information and branding, printed it back out, cropped it, and slapped it on the bottle. Worked like a charm, except that, by that point, I'd memorized the info I spent so much time placing on the label. Geography. The teacher was quite old with a very thick glass. One of my friends simply wrote and draw random things on the blackboard, then erased it to make it look like a dirty blackboard, wrote the test subject on the blackboard, then lightly erased them just enough to be readable from the back row. The whole class cheat on that day. If one of my classmates tried this, there would always be someone telling the teacher about this and then all the boys get detention. In high school, my US history professor had us turn in our phones at the front of the room during exams to make sure no one used them to cheat. While annoying for us, I suppose it gave him one less thing to worry about when looking for cheaters. Well, about halfway through the semester my professor had us switch seats, and I ended up next to this girl near the back of the classroom. When the next exam rolled around she turned her phone in with everyone else. Then during the exam I watched as she proceeded to pull out a second phone and use it to look up answers. Under this mask is another mask. My friend stole the USB drive from our teacher's projector table in chemistry. We were given MacBook Airs as school supplied tech for the entire year, so he just airdropped the whole USB to every student in the class and put the actual drive back on the table mid-lecture. That dude sells drugs now. I mean, he did in high school too. But as far as I know that's all he does. Brilliant mind that just doesn't give a crap. Airdrops it to teacher computer by mistake. Airdrop received projected onto the board. Oops. When I was in 7th grade my friend and I shared a basic calculator during every math test. We came up with a wire to help each other out. She sat in front of me and there was a ledge on the wall next to us. If we had a question about one of the problems we would type in the number of the problem and slightly slide it to the other. If we just set it down and didn't slide it there was no question. The other person would reply back with 1 meaning the answer was A, 2 meaning B, and so on. If we replied 10 then we didn't know the answer. Never got caught and ended up getting an A in that class. I want to try that so bad now. I'm taking a math test in college and I notice a guy sitting next to me is cheating off of my test. For some reason, I decided to help him out, so I just let him keep on looking. Eventually he starts making weird hand motions. I realize he is asking me to turn back a page. In for a penny and for a pound. So I do. We go through 3 whole pages together and eventually he's whispering questions at me. Ridiculous. Then, out of nowhere, he farts louder than I've ever heard anyone fart before. Everyone in a 20-foot radius turns and looks at him. I keep my head down. Finish my test all the while he doesn't look at me or signal to me again. I left and never saw him again. That was the craziest I've seen. Not because it was clever, but because it was the ballsiest turned weirdest cheating I've ever seen. I taped a sticky note into the neckline of my low-cut shirt. The teacher was a guy and noticed me staring at my own boobs and we locked eyes for about 4 seconds before he just sighed and turned away. We never spoke about it, lol. Def knew, just didn't want to bother, especially since it involved a young lady's private area. In my middle school, this one kid dropped his cheat sheet on the ground under his desk. Anytime he wanted to cheat he just put his head down and read from the sheet on the floor. The teacher didn't notice. Someone at my school placed a cheat sheet underneath his legs. When he needed it he'd open them and when the teacher was looking he'd close them. The teacher caught him doing this and confronted him during the test. She told him, "I want you to give me what's between your legs." Everyone laughed when she realized what she said. Honestly, if she said that to me, I wouldn't mind getting caught in the end, just for the funny story. I worked as a TAFE for a teacher during summer school in high school and I could clearly see these 2 students cheating by sharing their answers with each other. One guy was obviously craning his neck at a weird angle to look to his right and his friend was lifting up his exam so it was easier to read. Well, these 2 students had the exact same answers to all the problems. This was a math class and the test was not multiple choice. So, they both got the exact same score, 25%. I asked the teacher what he wanted to do and he said that he could give them both 0%. But what would be the point? They're both clearly going to fail the class. So, my insider tip is that if you're going to cheat, you shouldn't make it obvious to someone whose job is to just watch you all take the test for half an hour. And if you are going to copy answers, you're supposed to copy off someone who can pass the class. In my class we have 2 girls that were BFF and every test they made sure at least one of them is getting an A. They had long hair and on the backside of their necks they wrote the answers to the test on a paper and put some glue to make it stick to it. They would cite always one behind each other and when the test begins the only thing that they did is move their hair a bit while the other person see all the notes. When everyone behind the first girl would stare intensely at her neck, lol. Seen a girl write formulas on her cleavage and look down at it during a test. Professors can't really look but she showed us later. In high school geometry I didn't study a proof. I think it was a proof for Pythagorean theorem. I knew the teacher was a lazy po, so I just openly got out my textbook and copied it. Got an A. LOL. My 10th grade history teacher was a similar lazy frick. So lazy that we would all put our books on the floor and blatantly open them during tests. In university I asked for another paper and answered the questions twice. It was a 3-hour test, finished them both in approx 45 minutes. I remember feeling badass. I stood up, picked up my backpack and tripped, on purpose, but very real, throwing the papers in the air and emptying my backpack. Entire gym hall was laughing really hard. The person surveying and my friend helped me get my stuff together. I just gave my friend my test, apologized for the inconvenience, handed in my test and left. We both ended up having a 9/10. Good team player. In one university lit class the outline said the final exam was going to be open book. I must have missed the class where the teacher changed her mind, but I did half the test, with my books open on my desk, before the teacher noticed. I pointed out the outline. She just said, "Okay, whatever. Just put your books on the ground now," and that was that. Also, same test, a friend and I were comparing answers after. In the hallway, we both finished with half an hour to an hour to spare. Was a 3-hour exam. Finally I asked her about the question on the back page. What question on the back page? Turns out she had missed one. Went back in, professor gave her her exam back, and she finished it. Of course, being able to also adjust her previous answers based on what I had told her in the hallway. Sounds like that teacher is just chill. Weird kid in our class. Always been a mad C. Old mate decided to write a few notes on his penis. Was a little confused when I saw him check his notes. A group of students I knew in high school had a hard test in math. The teacher allowed his students to listen to music during the test, but to prevent people from cheating he walked around the classroom and checked to see if they were actually listening to music. You'd think they would just switch to music when he got closer, but oh no, they were much smarter. They recorded one of them singing a certain song. They took the instrumental version of the original song and put it in the background, and they placed the new version in the album instead of the original song. If you were to listen to it without paying much attention, you'd think it was just a normal song, especially because of the heavy accent he put on to match the original. But in the middle of the recording, the guy stopped following the lyrics. He started to sing the math equations. The teacher literally listened to the song while he was singing the equations and he didn't notice. They were never caught. Absolutely genius. I think letting the teacher listen to math equations being sung is quite a bit dumber than just switching to normal music when he came to listen. Super smart kid in my high school hacked into the system that scans the scantrons, found answers to multiple tests from his senior English honors teacher and proceeds to pass it along to all the other students. When he was caught it went all the way to the top, with federal and state agents coming to the high school. Everyone who used the answers failed and had to retake the class online. I had the teacher next year. All his tests were now short answer and essay based. Thanks, Brandon. Jesus, just reshuffle the questions, or redable the answers. Just swapping the test sheets during the test and let the test being done by the genius of the class, who was of course so good in the topic that he hadn't had any problems doing the test twice during the same time. The other student had the already filled out test of the genius on his table. To avoid being caught we didn't swap the tests back. Worked pretty good. The genius got his 1+ German grades, and the other student a 2, second best grade, as he did some mistakes so that the prof wouldn't be suspicious. In high school, I had ridiculously relaxed teachers. They pretty much handed me the opportunity to cheat. One let me take the test home to finish it. One let me take the test in the hallway without being monitored. One put the test online so we had to use laptops, again without being monitored. In short, nobody had to resort to crazy tactics when I was in school. We barely even had to try. Those are called open book, untimed exams. I call them assignments. In middle school we had a test where we had to fill in the names of the countries and stuff on a blank map. My friend drew the entire map on her arm to cheat and I thought it was so ridiculously funny. I once just straight took out the pre-test for my history test. Pre-test answers were the exact same as the real test answers, since I didn't turn it in and I just had the two tests right next to each other on my desk. This was in 8th grade and I swear to God that teacher was making us ace his class on purpose. 8th grade history was been the easiest class I have ever taken. Very few people didn't get 100% in my class. Our teacher gave us multiple choice quizzes that we would write out A, B, C, or D on lined paper. After the quiz was done, she had the class pass the papers around to be graded by a different student. A group of friends that sat near each other would write all lowercase c's. Grading would consist of modifying the C to look like either A, B, or D. A little line for A. Complete the circle and add a line for B. Leave C alone. And D would just have a longer line. I used to do the exact same thing. I always felt so grateful for the letter C. The teacher checks every student's pockets before every test. But this kid hid a note in his afro. He had an afro and got an A, and I got an A too. Why? He passed me his note and became my favorite person. I had a good one. I knew it was because unfortunately I messed up and got caught and my professor told me it was so simple yet genius. One of the best he had ever seen. All his tests were printed on light blue paper. We would take our tests in a large testing center with hundreds of other test takers taking hundreds of other tests. Tests were handed out. You were given X amount of time to take said test and had to turn said test back in with your Scantron. I simply printed out cheat sheets on the same color paper that was used on the test, pulled them out of my backpack when I started the test and used them through the entire test. Proctors never bothered checking cause it looked like the cheat sheets were just more pages on a 20-page test. I got caught cause one time I forget to make sure I put all my cheat sheets back into my backpack before I turned back in my test. They got a test back with an obvious extra page, traced it back to me and of course was called in. I had no choice but to own up to it cause my professor presented me with the cheat sheet I had printed. Silver lining was I actually did so poorly, 45%, on that exam that he didn't even change my grade or give any real punishment. Getting caught cheating while simultaneously performing so poorly was punishment enough. He told me he typically on first offense gives an automatic 50% to anyone who cheats and thus in my case it wasn't needed. He joked it was obvious that I needed the cheat sheet, even though it didn't benefit me whatsoever. He also complimented me on my cheating strategy, one he'd never seen or expected. Sure enough, the next test was printed on bright pink paper and all subsequent tests were on various colored paper. Thankfully I got my act together and aced the test right after this. Ended up with B in the class. I scratched formulas onto a clear ruler so that if you laid it on the desk you could read the shadow, but if I lifted the ruler it just looked scratched up. We were supposed to have privacy folders up and all sitting apart from each other, but this one girl was right next to the smart kid with her folder down, muttering the answers as she copied. She got caught. Oh, I freaking love privacy folders because they hid my cheat sheets. But there was this one time I had my cheat sheet out behind the folder copying away and I didn't notice that our teacher was right behind me. Good thing she didn't notice the cheat sheet. I just simply wrote cheat sheets on the wood grain desk. Honestly, I'm surprised my teacher and fellow students never noticed me erasing my desk just before turning in my test. In high school I wrote on the rubber thing of those nice G2 pens where your fingers would go. Me and my friend created a system of taps and snaps to make letters and numbers. Originally, it was to play tic-tac-toe when we got bored, but I joked that we could turn it into Monopoly if we tried. And then we worked on how we could play Monopoly across a classroom. We never actually used it, but we both theoretically could have. This reminds me of the two kids back in high school who would play in brain chess. When walking past each other, one would say something like king to d3 or something and next period the other would say bishop to e4 or something. I wanted to say they were freaking with us, but both were chess club and had the highest marks in the school, thus very well could be legitimate. Wasn't a test, but in grade 9 math, we had nothing else to do, so the math teacher gave us a task. We had 27 cubes that can attach to each other. There were 3 cubes each of the 9 different colors. You had to make one big cube out of the smaller ones, but you can't have 2 cubes of the same color on the same side. This was difficult since side pieces covered 2 sides and corner pieces covered 3 sides. My friend and I were struggling on it so much and were so close to finishing but made a mistake somewhere. So, we secretly grabbed another cube of a color that wasn't one of the past 9 and put it on the cube. We gave it to the teacher to check and lucky us, he is a little bit colorblind. We passed. I worked in a school in Shanghai for a while and saw a couple of good ones. First was a girl who covered her arms and legs with paragraph upon paragraph, much in the way Arnold Rimmer does in Red Dwarf. Shanghai is a hot place in the spring and she wore white long sleeves, which over the course of the 2 hours started to turn blue. She failed. The other one, a girl managed to convince whoever was in charge that she was allowed to bring a smart calculator into her history exam. She would have probably gotten away with it, as it just looked like a big screen calculator, but was Wi-Fi enabled and allowed her to access Wikipedia. Luckily she was dumb as bricks, and copied the article word for word, including underlining links and writing down the tiny citation numbers. She failed, but is now studying in Cali somewhere. If I remember, another teacher told another story of a girl who said she had the shoots. Completely believable with the food that school was serving, but the teacher who stood outside the door could hear her listening to an article on her phone, stashed beforehand, on loudspeaker. She dropped out in the final year. If you're thick enough to copy citation numbers, you don't deserve to pass. Friend of mine would wear white nylons and a knee-length skirt. She'd hide a cheat sheet under her nylons. It's genius honestly. No professor is gonna ask a female student to lift up their skirt. Doing this with gym shorts works well too. If any administrator or teacher would have asked to see my upper thigh, where answers are written, I would have said no way. I cheated on a Spanish test by having a built-in headphone in my beanie. So before the test I put on text-to-speech all the words I needed to know being spelled out like 10 times each. Never got caught. I used to write acronyms for things to remember in the webs of my fingers so when my fingers were together you couldn't see what I had written. Still had to remember what the acronyms meant though, haha. Not that crazy, but way back in middle school, instead of desks, we sat in tables. Whenever we had a test, we had to put up folders to make barriers between ourselves. Some kids would write answers lightly on the corners of some folders for the kids sitting next to them to see. Sometimes some kids would just lift up the folders and pretend like they were wiping off eraser shavings. Pakistani guy here. I was literally discussing the finals questions whilst sitting in the gym, Canadian University BTW, with another Pakistani and the invigilator shows up. I told him we were reciting the Quran for good luck. He was floored and said okay but please stop. He made a goddamn language all on his own. Then he proceeded to write all the math formulas in a language of his own creation, put it in the front sleeve of his binder and just dropped it on the floor right next to his chair. Every now and then he would pop a look at it. I know this because he told me a week later after the test were passed back out. Might I add that this was in middle school. Who the heck could make their own language that they could remember in middle school? Mayo, I did that but never used it to cheat. Too much of a goody two shoes I suppose. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.